Hello, Global Theater. My name is Gerry Fialka. Today is December 9, 2024. Want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast, I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. Also want to thank Joe Green for introducing me to today's guest, Richard Bartholomew, Part Two. Wow, Richard. We struggled through Part One because of some tech problems, but here we are a week later. Thank you so much. And where are you calling from, Richard?
I'm calling from Pflugerville, Texas.
How cool is that? One thing I did look up because I took 4 pages of notes in part one, and I could just research that for years. Nabokov said, "Beware of platitudes." It wasn't Hannah Arendt, there, but then you'd never know because I went to uh, what site we both use, quote investigator, and it wasn't there. So again, I mean, I have quotes on you on when you Google quotes, and they're sourced by me, and they're wrong, and eventually I correct them, but once they're up there not right, people use them. So
I know
that's the what do we do about this problem, Richard?
that is a pet peeve of mine. I research the hell out of quotes, and anybody that posts a quote that I'm able to see, the first thing I do is I check it,
Yeah,
and I may not say anything to them about it, and many
yeah,
times I haven't, but I correct it for myself so that I know who
yeah.
the real source was. But
It's great.
Nabokov, there's a book called The Dialogic Imagination from Nabokov to the Realists. And it's a classic on the subject. And I did the book cover for the University of Texas Press.
Oh, how cool is that? Well, that's funny because I wanted to ask you one thing about quotes is whoever, if they say men or if they say man or men in a quote, I change it to human. I'm sorry. I just don't want the distraction to happen. Do you think aesthetically in the big picture that's a no-no or okay?
You know, it's okay when I'm reading, but I know it's been done. I was thoroughly taught about the classic grammar use of he, him, when gender is not known. Um, that opens up a whole can of worms, and I haven't really thought it completely through, but, you have woman. So, right from the get go, you've got to start correcting all kinds of weird stuff like that.
Yeah. No, you once you start correcting little, then it gets in trouble. So that was good. So I kind of found out what reviewing it where we left off, but there was one thing that hit me really immensely deep in that when you quoted Rod Sterling or told me about Rod Sterling saying, does the
Surely,
art Serling, sorry, I always do that. Does the art control the maker, or does the artist control the art?
talent.
And
I misquoted. There are two kinds of artists. One
yeah,
whose talent controls him, and one who controls his talent. So it's about
right.
talent. Be
It's
any talent.
yeah, talent. And I just found this Frederick Schiller playwright on distinguishing two modes of poetry. And I'm just curious, taking off on Rod's thoughts and integrating Schiller's, your comments. He says one mode of poetry is naive, ancient, assumes language is a window into reality. A second mode of poetry is sentimental. It belongs to our artificial age. It sees language as a mirror to our inner turmoil. Just dividing in two. Any thoughts on that? And does it integrate with your Rod's ideas?
Yeah, totally. I I gravitate towards the latter part of the quote. Uh, Language itself creates a false reality,
Yeah.
and you tweak the language a little bit, and you change a lot. So they're both true in their own way, and probably the truer sense of it is a blend of both in between the two. There's
Yeah.
my bifurcation um,
Tendency.
bifurcation fallacy
Oh,
happening.
bifurcation fallacy. Yes, bifurcation. Who invented that one?
Um, that's actually the technical term for it. Linguists. Well, no, that's a logical fallacy. So logicians, mathematicians,
Yeah.
um, and so since it's part of logic, it gets used by a lot of professions. But linguists tend to point it out.
Yeah, because I have a whole page on the coincidence of opposites, dialectic, polarities, dualities, binaries. We could go into that sometime. But let's go on to two of my film heroes have this mantra: ignore yourself. Jonas Mika says there is no self-expression. And Cecil Taylor says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. Is art making more self expression or more your vehicle for whatever technologies, environments, and cultures are dominant?
I think self is a vehicle. Whatever self is, um, it's more about being tuned in to, we'll call it a frequency, a vibration. Um,
Yes.
I really think that that information exists in the fabric of the cosmos, the fabric of space time, as Kubrick Spielberg put it in AI,
You're
artificial
right.
intelligence.
Can art making be egoless?
No, now that I will give a firm no to, because I came to the conclusion in my own art that without some aspect of ego, without ego, you would not do art. I came to that conclusion. Nobody does art without ego. It takes when you are faced with a blank canvas, it takes ego to put something on that canvas where other people are going to see it. Now, I've come to the opposite side of that. After I closed my studio 11 years ago, and I haven't really drawn since or painted. Where I discovered, as we discussed before, where I discovered that everything I do is art. It turns out that the art is always happening in my personality, in my head, the way I see things, the way I do things, the way I translate everything into language. All of that is my art, and I enjoy it. I would continue to come up with daily cartoons. After 17 years of doing a daily political cartoon, I still watch the news. I'm not as married to the 24-hour news cycle, but I still watch the news pretty closely. And ideas for cartoons will pop into my head, and I enjoy them immensely. Nobody else even hears about them. Nobody knows about them. Um, so the art is always happening in the person, in the artist. But taking the time to work on something, to work it out, to do a sketch, to do a drawing, to do a finished cartoon, you're doing that so that other people can see it and hopefully give you positive feedback and positive energy back from it. Or they will take it and be influenced by it. But the idea of wanting to influence something or wanting to influence other people That itself is ego, I think. So I'm, I've seen it from both sides, and I think
Yeah.
purely it is ego.
Very good. And Steve Martin loves to quote David Mamet: art is a product of the unconscious mind. Any comment?
Uh, all right. Yes, it is because everything is. Uh,
Everything is.
there are 100 million neural links in your body, and when I refer to the brain, I visualize it as the entire nervous system because they know about the brain and the gut. Follow your gut, all that. That's true. You have a second brain, and it's in your biome, your gut biome, and but it really is your entire nervous system. So if you ever seen a picture of that, it's like a jellyfish. It's like the thing up here that looks like a little melon, and then all of the tentacles going out from it. That is the brain, because the brain wouldn't know anything without the very endpoints of that last nerve on your little finger. It would not. It would be missing information without that entire nervous system. So, but 100. I'm getting the numbers wrong here, but I'm in the ballpark. 100 million neural connections in the brain. No, here's the fact. The brain processes these neural senses 100 million per second. Um, unconsciously.
Right.
Consci- consciously, consciously, it's 50 to 100 per second.
Yeah.
So nowhere near. A lot of stuff is happening even in us and our sense of reality that we never are really aware of, but it feeds back to us defining that reality in a much
Yeah.
slower way, in a much more limited framed way. And then we have the audacity to translate that into language, which narrows it down into like a little picture, a little picture that's completely distorted from what reality really is. But
I.
that's why you have to. It there's a That's where that sense of being tuned into something larger comes
Yeah.
from. And lots of artists, lots of when you study creativity itself, you get lots of quotes from all kinds of artists throughout history that will say, "Well, it was in the air, and I just received it." You
The
know,
muse. Yeah, because Dante prayed to the muse to aid him. But it's you also touch perfectly on back to the Rod Serling is in the Schiller was Gary Snyder, the poet, said art poets see the world without language, then put that seeing into language. So there's that thing. Like George Lakoff says, "Hey, we're only operating to 80 or whatever the percentage is consciously." Like we're defined more 80% unconscious or subconsciously. It's just I don't know if that's true, because me and you, it seems we're both here 100%. Don't you think? Doesn't it feel like we're both here kind of closer to 100% than 20%?
of course it does, but that. So the reality is always counterintuitive. Yeah. So, yeah, do trust, and of course that goes back to the gut and intuition. So, even intuition is more about the overall, not the little
Yeah,
framing and define do of it.
yeah,
Uh, but our conscious thoughts on everything is counterintuitive to what reality is.
yeah.
I think.
Yeah, that's good. And then it's how we juggle it and how we battle. Like if you're a poet like Gary Snyder, well, then you put it into language, and then like how accurate is the language? Well, it's like, but here's Condero in Unbearable Likeness of Being. This is why I love writing, because the character that I'm writing about can go further than I can. Well, that sounds like, well, yeah, right. You mean I take this pen and I write a character. How can it go further? It can't go further. The user can read it and take it further, but when you're drawing your cartoon, could it go further than you
It,
can?
it most it most certainly can. You are having a dialogue, whether you're working on paper or canvas. It's about a dialogue with your medium.
Yeah,
I always thought of it in terms of I'm having a conversation with the canvas.
that's
I
good.
will tell it something. I will put a mark on it. I'll put
Yeah,
a slash of paint on it, and then I will stop and listen, and it will tell me something. And I will look. It'll show me something, and then I may do something completely different on the next stroke based on what it told me. And it's
yeah,
that back and forth conversation you have with your medium in everything you create.
amazing. Okay, so McLuhan says everything we invent extends some humanness. So knife and fork extends the teeth. Shutter in a camera or projector extends our eyelid. Maybe even non-tangible, say religion or philosophy, extends consciousness. What does, in that case, the paintbrush extend, or when you're drawing your cartoon, the writing utensil extend? What humanness?
I don't know, but it's something because they're now finding out that now that we've gone into complete word processing, even in school, even in elementary school, uh, you know, gravitating towards typing rather than handwriting, they're finding out that you don't learn as well. You do not learn it as well. The physical act, when we touched on that a little bit before, drawing was a major factor in basic education in the 19th century, up to the 19th century. In the 20th century, they eliminated drawing from the curriculum as a basic item. Reading, writing, arithmetic, drawing. That's the way it was because there was no photography, and every scientist had a had a sketchbook,
Yeah.
and anyone who studied anything in detail drew it, and so you had to know drawing as a basic education item in school. That got eliminated after the 19th century, and much to our detriment. Same, we're finding out the same now with actual cursive writing, with actual writing it down on a piece of paper. The feel of that writing instrument on that paper uh, reinforces the ideas that you're thinking of and making them physical. Not only do I remember a cartoon. I've forgotten a lot of cartoons, but I will see the cartoon. I've been digging through a lot of file boxes here in the last couple of days, and I will find an old cartoon, and I will instantly not only remember doing the cartoon and drawing each line on it, I will remember, uh, you know, what what I was feeling, um, other memories that occurred during the creation of that cartoon. Not as specifically or purely as the physical making of the cartoon itself, but it's amazing. It's like when you smell a smell and it brings back a memory. That's a big mnemonic device. You will hear a song. Music is a huge mnemonic device.
Yeah.
You'll hear a song. It'll take you back to where you were when you first heard the song. And drawing is the same way. Drawing and writing are the same way. They all these physical activities we do in the process of thinking will give us memories and reinforce things. And there are neural links up there that take care of all that. Typing, not so much. Typing, not so much.
But Richard, I want you to go back to the question for a second, but I got to tell you the joke. The kid finds out that his dad goes to work and has a job. He gets to that age. He figures that out. He says, "So, Dad, what do you do for your job?" And he says, "I'm an art teacher. I teach people how to draw." And the kid goes, "You mean they forgot?" So, but you said, I don't know what the drawing utensil, the writing utensil extends. I like that. I don't know. But what's your hunch? What humanness does it extend? Memory? Were you saying memory? What what humanness does it extend?
Well, there's the extended mind, first of all.
Yeah.
And so it's part of that.
Okay.
Um, I love the concept of the extended mind. It's a real thing. There is a part of our brain, and I know this from people that have had brain injuries. They know a lot about the brain from people who've had brain injuries, and they
Yeah.
lose the ability to to have these senses. One of them is knowing where your physical body stops and everything you think of as outside your physical body begins. That stopping point, that line that shapes, that you see as shaping you, the limits of your physical body that you can touch, that is just a figment of your mind. You injure that part of your brain and you have trouble knowing where you end and everything else begins.
Yeah.
And that is the extended mind. And in reality, it does go on. It flows on. You know, we through the late '60s and '70s, we had the sense of the aura. Everybody talked about their aura.
Yeah.
Well, that is a model we created to talk about the extended mind. Um, you have a better sense of it, like within a foot of you, I guess. There's the idea, although later on, '80s, '90s, 2000s, the idea of personal space is the remaining thing that we still have in our culture. The idea of personal space
Yeah.
is what we first sensed as the aura. Um, don't invade my personal space, or do invade my personal space, which, whatever your preference is. But you have a personal space. That's the extended mind, and that's that 1 foot or so distance that we have a real sense of, and we actually talk about it. But even that doesn't have a limit. It continues out. We are actually the quantum superposition. The best thing I can say about it.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's good. And I want to go back to that gut thing because when I interview musicians, I go, my friend says the three T's of music are technique, theory, and taste. So technique, you learn how to play an instrument. Theory, you know the structure. How does one acquire taste?
oh boy, that that is a that is the that's a great question, because I've known some brilliant people. I will not name names, but I've been in the houses of some brilliant, wealthy people, um, great businessmen, made a fortune, great intellects, and they had mansions, or semi mansions. And the art they hung on their wall was the biggest bunch of crap you ever saw. They didn't, they didn't have the slightest idea what a good painting was.
Right.
Uh, you know, uh, where something that looked like they picked up at a local fair that was
Yeah.
drawn by a hack amateur, or maybe it was a relative that they know that but it was beyond that, because it was everything on their walls. Whatever room I walked into, it was beyond. It was a matter of poor taste, is what it was, and taste. And get this, art appreciation. You have to be taught to appreciate a lot of things.
Yeah.
You're not born with this appreciation. I was talking to a guy at a little dinner we were having once, and he said, "I don't like abstract art. I like realist art." And I was ready. I was old enough now, and I thought it through enough that I was ready for that. And I said, "Do you like music?" And he said, "Yeah, I have a lot of favorite songs. And I love music." I said, "Music is completely abstract.
Yeah.
If you for music to be realism, it would have to be what you're hearing, and the conceptual musicians and composers went that far and had
Yeah.
like the 4 minutes of just ambiance, whatever's
430,
happening, that
John Cage, 433. Great example.
cage, yeah. Yeah. And so I said, if that is realist music, but you would think that was nuts, like you think abstract art is nuts.
They
But
hate that.
music itself, the music are that we are creating, the music that we hear every day, the music we sing and play, that is completely abstract. It has nothing to do with the reality, audio reality. And so there you go. I say, so you like music, you like something abstract. You have, but you don't like abstract art. You like art that represents something, that looks like something, that's something you can say, this is a painting of this. And that's what the surrealists tried to break through, and that led to the Cubists. I was going to go back to Picasso. Picasso said, um, I spent my entire life trying to draw like a child.
Yes, I need that. That's great.
And then the Cubists to the abstract expressionists to today's conceptual artists, they still, to this day, the nighttime talk show hosts are making fun of the banana taped to the wall with a piece of duct
Yeah.
tape.
Yeah.
But I love that kind of conceptual art because
Oh, yeah. That was brilliant. And you touched on what I hear is biomimicry, though, because there are composers who hear a messiaen, heard the birds, and then sort of transcribe bird sounds. And are they touching on what we define as nice harmonies or nice melodies? And then do animals create dissonance, and like sounds that are screechy, that are like, that sounds like, avant-garde jazz, or, or Albert Eiler or Nat Coleman. So how does that, is biomimicry something operating in this? I'll tell you what people say, Richard. I say, how does one acquire taste? They go, by exposure. So I don't think it is just exposure. I think, you acquire taste, you're taught to appreciate. You said that. That's smart. I think that's well put. But some people gravitate towards the shags, and some people go, that's horrible, and they can't handle it. So, some people like this music and some people like that music. So that thing about taste, well, it's in your gut, but yeah, go ahead.
and there's another important element to that. I think
Yeah.
this gets to the real root of taste. There will be people who have appreciation for music or art or whatever, and they will have kind of an equal knowledge and appreciation of it, but they will like totally different things. Their taste will be completely different, and that goes back to um, psychological bonding. We go through certain ages where we bond. We know the idea of it from the the chicken that's born, and if you are there when the chicken is born and it gets to know you first, it will bond with you and follow you everywhere. Well, we bond with everything. We bond with everything. We do too. And I really think that somewhere around the ages of 6 to 9, for sure, certainly the music I was hearing on the radio every day, Top 40,
Yep.
KLIF, 1190 in Dallas.
Yep.
Uh, That, that's my jam. Today we call it our jam.
Yeah.
Um, but it was beyond, it was the music. I tended, my jam settled in on the music my babysitters, I wasn't yet old enough, but my babysitters were listening to
Babysitters,
the
huge.
girl groups, the 16-year-olds, when I was old enough to be babysat by a 16-year-old. um, the music they were listening to is what I eventually settled on, is what I bonded with. I don't know why, but it's the girl groups of the 60s. It was Leslie Gore. I could write an entire Broadway musical uh, with Leslie Gore's music. It tells a story. You could
Yeah.
write a music on it. And people have done that with Carole King, and I've done it with others, but you could do it with, and guess who produced all of Leslie Gore's hits? Quincy Jones, who we just lost.
Did he really? I didn't know that. That's
Yeah,
amazing. Jeez.
that was his brilliance of pop music. And he
Yeah.
was beating the Beatles in the charts with those songs in the early
Wow.
days.
Well, let me just talk. I've talked a lot about this in the past, the top 40 for the boomers, because we listened to a transistor radio. That's about the size of a cell phone. It was the same thing, and we hid it under our pillows. And we were hearing reggae, but we didn't know it. It was just top 40. We heard the Israelites, um, singing. Uh, Desmond Decker singing the Israelites, and we didn't know that was reggae. That was just the lifeblood of our sounds. We heard "Oh Happy Day" by Edwin Hawkins. That was gospel. But we weren't going, oh, that's a genre. We were just going, that's "Oh Happy Day." And then we learned opera through Mighty Mouse. So it was that.
Yep.
And, we heard jazz and blues through our parents playing the Great American Songbook. Gershwin or Irving Berlin and Cole Porter were all mining the blues and jazz, and we didn't know that. We were just getting it from, Quincy came out of jazz. That's amazing what you just said. That bonding is a factor in
I think it,
acquiring.
I
Yeah,
think it's a primary factor in your own personal taste.
yeah,
Uh, and it's what you're exposed. There will be younger people. I've run into younger people, not many, who will know the songs that we listen to, and they will have an appreciation for them.
yeah,
And and it's a situation where their parents played those songs when they were at the bonding age. It's what you hear at the bonding age,
yeah,
and what you continue with. There may be other ages of bonding, but I really think that, like, 6 or 7 to about 10, 11, and that includes TV shows as well. There are
yeah,
TV shows that only aired a short time in that period that I'm a super fan of. Nobody else even heard of them. If they were only like a year or so different than me in age, they never even
yeah.
heard of the show. Here I am, still a super fan of it. So, we bond with things. I think that's
It's
a
amazing.
factor of taste.
Amazing. So cool, Richard, because I recommend it. It's What's in My Bag. Amoeba Records, the record store, has these musicians come in and pick 10 records and explain why they picked them in 10 minutes. And it's inevitable. I'm freaking out because I've never heard the musician. They're young and they're popular. But this kid, he's a singer songwriter, black from like England, and he picks Rassan Roland Kirk. And I was like, what? And he says, yeah, I saw it in this movie that came out last year. And then he goes, and now I picked Archie Shepp. And I says, I heard it in a movie last year. So I was like, this is amazing that he's a singer songwriter tapping into the avant-garde jazz I love through the movies he saw that are just coming out. That's,
Yep.
to me, it's like astounding. Here's a quote, and I also want to say, I'm a guitar freak. I love to talk guitarists. And you come from the land where so many of the guitar heroes came out of. The Texas Guitar Slingers is not a cliche, it's a reality because Charlie Christian changed jazz guitar forever, and so did T-Bone Walker change rock and blues guitar forever. And they were street musicians in Dallas together, and they only had one guitar, so they would hand it off to each other, and they're changing. So this is about location. uh, this is a McLuhan quote extending on this word taste, and it might apply, it might not. I'm just curious your thoughts. He said, song is slowed down speech. The reason cultures have different musical taste is ultimately connected to language difference. Now, it's kind of two things going there, but if you want me to say it again, I will. Any thoughts on that?
Say it again.
Song is slowed down speech. The reason cultures have different musical taste is ultimately connected to language difference.
I never thought of it, but I think that's correct. I think that's very true.
Yeah.
Uh, my my brain went off into a footnote after you said slow down speech.
Well, that's
Because I
sort of,
discovered,
yeah, go
I
ahead.
just
Sorry.
if you and you mentioned bird calls earlier.
Yeah.
If I thoroughly believe this, I don't know if anybody else has had this thought, but I came up with this thought. Nothing's original. I'm sure somebody has. If you slow down bird calls, you just go outside, and there's a lot
Yeah.
of birds. You just record general bird calls. You bring that tape in and you slow it way down, and it sounds like howling and ooh, ah, ooh. I think what you're hearing there are dinosaurs. If
Oh,
you want to
yeah.
know what it was like to stand in a forest or a jungle of dinosaurs, I think that comes as close as anything to what it would sound like.
Yeah.
Of course, those are the avian dinosaurs. I'm not sure if the reptilian dinosaurs had a signature sound, but certainly that's what the avian dinosaurs would have sounded like, I think.
That's
So,
really,
yeah, I think
I like,
slowing down, slowing down language, and that was their language, that's the bird's language. I've learned to talk. We have a lot of grackles here in central Texas. I've learned to talk a little bit to them, but I've learned how intelligent they are too. And I even developed a relationship with a couple of them, and I was able to communicate with them. And I can communicate with an entire parking lot full of grackles by giving their happy call, I call it. It's one of the few that a human is easily able to do, but it's just start low and finish high in a whistle. And I'll do that. I'll get out of my car at the grocery store and I'll get out and I'll just give that call, and they will return the call and they'll start doing it all, as I'm walking into the store. They will call to me and I'll call to them, call it the happy sound. And there was also this chortling also when I first started doing this. Notice that some would call back and others would go into this chortle, this sound. And I decided that was them laughing at my funny human accent, trying to trying to speak their language.
trying to speak
Uh,
their language. The squirrels in my yard, I go, and
I
they'll
do
look at,
that. I
yeah,
learned that. I learned that in the '90s, and I tried it with squirrels, and they hear you. And it
they hear
communicates.
you.
I don't know what I'm saying to them, but they
Right. But
hear.
that's funny. Do they laugh and go, what is that human trying to say to me? Just go give me some food, dude.
I really, yeah.
Well,
I named the two I got to know. I named them Mitch and Melanie.
oh, right.
I
Cool.
named them Mitch and Melanie, and I was able to. I would like bring out some birdseed, and I would put it down in an area where I knew that they hung out, and I would yell, "Mitch, Mitch," and I would step back, and sure enough, Mitch would come. Now I knew these two birds, a female and a male, because genetically they had a bad left foot, and I saw a couple of generations of that bad left foot. And I would call them Mitch and Melanie Jr. and on and on. But that's how I knew them. And
Yeah.
so I would yell, Mitch, and Mitch would come and get the food
Yeah.
after I backed away. So they're intelligent. They and we now know that they recognize us. Not only that, birds talk about the extended mind. Birds think of a fan whirling, a ceiling fan whirling, where you look up and it's a blur to us. A bird's mind and vision is so fast. They have more cones and rods than we do, but it also requires a faster mind. They can see the individual blades even when it's whirring at high speed.
Yeah.
And so when they see us, we're like we're in super slow motion to them. And it turns out that all fast, small creatures have that faster sense of reality and can break down reality in a finer sense of time. But they're smart and they recognize us as individuals. They know who we are and everything we do. We know nothing about them. We don't know who they are as
Yeah.
individuals. We know nothing about what they're doing. And what they're doing is watching us carefully and learning our habits and learning everything about us. And we're oblivious to them.
Well, maybe we learned uh, dam building from beavers. Again, biomimicry. But
Yeah, of
but this
course.
yeah, but this second part of the McLuhan is the reason cultures have different musical tastes is ultimately connected to language difference. We know this thing exists called the Southern accent, and then the people in Brazil, yeah, their music invaded America, and everybody felt it was romantic, and we weren't necessarily knowing what the words were saying. And my favorite is the tuba throat singers. They sing about, as their music's transcendental when I listen to it, but they're singing about three things: their boots, snow, and their horses. And so I'm curious. We had someone read Finnegan's Wake with us once, and they were from down south. They never read the Wake. They didn't really know what they were getting into, but their reading was amazing, and it felt as though the accent was so integrated with the flow of the musicality of Joyce's words. So then that part, especially being from the South, the reason cultures have different musical tastes is ultimately connected to language difference. Do you think that is any thoughts on that?
Um, no, I would have to think about that. What my mind rushed to though was um, I it's a kind of a funny thing that I came up with, but I became obsessed with um, well because my last name Bartholomew is Aramaic,
Yeah.
so that was the language that Jesus spoke. It predates Hebrew, and that's where you see my last name everywhere around the world. It's not doesn't have a nationality because it's so old. Um, but I became obsessed with being able to say Merry Christmas in Aramaic, and
How's it go?
I finally learned it. Hidoku Briha, Hidoku Briha, and I learned how it looks written. I have a meme that I post every now and then of Merry Christmas. It's Merry Christmas written in Aramaic and with a little cut line that explains what it is. But it's kind of a bizarre thing because even though it's Jesus's language, Jesus would have had no idea what you were talking about. If you went in a time machine back to Jesus and you went up to him and you said, Hidoku Briha, what? He would think you're crazy. He'd think you're nuts. He's off to celebrate the festival of lights.
Now, Richard, what's the difference between art and science?
Well, hmm, we had that discussion in part one.
Did we
Um,
already? Okay, I'm glad you asked that because
yeah, I was wondering, I was fishing to see if that question was inspired by our previous discussion. But
I I I tried to listen, and I think some of the breakup, I said, well, I want to review it but that's all right. I mean, basically, it gets to a lot of the things I don't really want to repeat. So let's go
it's a
in.
great no, it's a great question, and I'll just say this that uh, there's a science and an art to everything. That was the
Yeah,
gist of it.
yeah.
Uh, Everything has a science and an art. Everything is an art. Everything is a science. And we talked about sleep being that way. When we started breaking up, we talked about how
Oh, that's when this
sleep,
art of sleep. You
the art of
talked about,
sleep,
yes.
sleep, sleep is certainly a science, and we've learned a lot in the last 20, 30 years about sleep
Yeah.
scientifically. But I discovered that human sleep is an art. I think
Oh yeah.
for sure. And talk about biomimicry. You know how dogs and cats will stretch before they, they'll also like walk in a circle. But you know how they stretch? They stretch way out and then they go to sleep. And then when they wake up, they stretch. Well, it turns out that if you experiment with this, the stretching will actually help you go to sleep. And when you're waking up, the stretching itself will actually bring you into a lighter stage and help you wake up. It actually physically, once again, back to the extended mind, the physical act of stretching causes you to go into that sleep mode and to go into the waking mode. And you
I
see
do
that
that.
that's and most humans don't do it. I've noticed they're oblivious to that, but that's the
I
value of
learned.
bio.
Yeah, my friend who studied Moshe Feldenkrais says before you get out of bed, just do the ladder move. Pull your arms and extend your feet, and just I don't always do that, but it's amazing. But my wife does the stretching before she goes to bed,
Yeah,
and she has trouble sleeping sometime, and that's the art of sleep is so important. It reminded me of Harry Smith saying that the purpose of cinema is to put you to sleep, because then you're like Yoko said, you dream a dream alone, it's a dream. If you dream a dream with other people, it's reality. So that's what you do. You sit in a movie theater and share this dream with other people. And Harry learned that all from Bruno. Like, how could what you don't want movies to put you to sleep, but they do. Not because they're boring, but they put you into that more like, well, what is the art of sleeping?
yeah, definitely. Yep. Yeah, it definitely helps you go to sleep and it helps you wake up, and that's why dogs do it. That's why cats
Yeah,
do it. But they don't think about it. They don't.
yeah,
They don't eliminate. They don't eliminate the thought. They don't think about it enough to eliminate the thought or eliminate the process from your life. And humans have done that. Thinking has not been a valuable thing overall. It's thinking, being the most intelligent species on the planet has not been a generally always good thing. There's been some bad things that have happened. Uh,
well, my collection of think quotes are George Clinton, Parliament Funkadelic, think it ain't illegal yet. In the Marx Brothers are in a jam, and one said, we got to think, and the other one says, we already tried that. And Captain B,
I can,
Captain
go
Captain
ahead.
Beefheart, I've had too much to think.
Here's something I came up with. Underthinkers think thinkers are overthinkers.
Oh my God. Underthinkers are, but say it again.
Underthinkers think thinkers are overthinkers.
Yeah, are overthinkers. Yeah. Yeah, that's Beefheart switching. I've had too much to drink to I've had too much to think. Can you overthink? Did we
I
do
also
our
say,
yeah, go ahead.
I also say, no one is ahead of their time. It only looks that way from behind.
That's what have you ever heard Martha Graham said, great artists aren't ahead of their times, they are their times.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. We talk about Orwell being ahead of his time, but if you look at what he was reading and who he was talking to and what he was studying, he was right in his time, even when he was preparing to write 1984. That
Yeah.
was all happening. James Burnham, he was reading James Burnham. I've written about this, but I'll just leave that there. That's James
Beautiful.
Burnham, and who who became the editor of National Review, partner of William Buckley Jr. Also became a covert action specialist in the CIA. James Burnham. That's who Orwell was studying and the year or so before, he wrote 1984.
Unbelievable.
And
So it's
man,
Burnam.
B U R uh, Burnham,
H.
Burnham, Ham, Burnham,
Okay,
James Burnham, um,
very good. I'll be
longtime
writing.
editor of National Review,
Yeah.
but also, and before the CIA, he was an undercover agent for whatever, FBI, whatever. And he was hunting down communists in the 20s and 30s. And okay, I better stop talking.
No, Richard,
Anyway,
I would like to do a whole
that,
podcast. I'd like to do a whole podcast on politics, MK Ultra, abstract expressionism as a CIA, all these things. But did I talk to you about archiving in the part one? Do you remember that?
no, we
Okay, so
we didn't get to art.
let's go into that. This is Charles Baudelaire. If you try to make a statement long, deep, and rich, it will age very fast. If you try only to own the day you're talking, it will last forever. That's flipped by David Lee Roth, here today, gone later today. So if it isn't the whole point of life to live in the moment, be here now. So then we invented the word archive in 1400s, keep safe, free from harm. 200 years later, it's pretty much what we know the word archive is: record preserved as evidence. And so there's two questions. Basically, is archiving innate or invented? And do you have plans for your own archive? But, this whole idea of the Egyptians saving stuff in their coffin with them. And so, most people our age have boxes of stuff. And if we're lucky, some college might archive it, and if not, our loved ones have to do something with it when we die, and often they'll just trash it. And does that matter? Well, I think archives are an important thing, but I also love that the futurists said destroy all museums and libraries. Although I go to a library every day, I know it's evident we need archives to study and research the past. But any thoughts on all this? I just gobbledygook together. I mean, this idea of archiving in your archives. Yeah.
Um, it was what was the guy who wrote A Thousand Days about Kennedy? Um,
Uh, Manchester? No.
no, he wrote Death of a President,
Yeah.
but I want to say Schlesinger, but I don't know. Anyway, he said the purpose of history is to show us that our own times are not oppressive.
Yeah.
So history has a purpose.
Say that
The
one more
purpose
time.
of history, the
Yeah.
purpose of history is to show us that our own times are not uniquely oppressive.
Yeah. So it
And I
puts
just
us
wrote
in.
an essay about
Yeah.
I just wrote an essay about the 2024 election where I compared it to the first triumvirate of Rome. And there you
Yeah.
go. Uh, the parallels with the first triumvirate of Rome are amazing in what we just went through. But nobody, if you don't know that, everybody's on edge politically right now and very stressed. If they only knew what Octavius and Caesar were going through with Cassius and Brutus. Anyway, I wrote about that, trying to tell people that it's happened before, and there's nothing. This is not a precedent. Humans have been through this many times before. Not uniquely oppressive.
It reminded me of Wyndham Lewis saying, "Artists live in the present and write a detailed history of the future." So again, it's like this idea. I mean, don't you think the point of life is to live in the moment? So, Do you have plans for your own archives?
Um, yeah, they're well on their way. I'm in 3 museums.
Oh, that's
Uh,
good.
I'm proud of, museums devoted to what I did. One of
Yes.
which is the Billy Ireland. I'll plug that one. The Billy Ireland Library and Museum of Cartooning at Ohio State Columbus is the preeminent museum and library of the art of cartooning. I call it the Folger Shakespeare Library of Cartooning.
Yeah, that's
And
great.
so I have a small collection there, but they are going to get all the rest of my stuff. They will even archive your digital stuff. So um, that's a project in the near future, is to get all of that stuff to them, expand my collection there. I'm also at the American History Center at the University of Texas. They have my physical art, the actual paper art, um, and you know,
Well, you got to
also
come.
one cartoon made it into the Newseum, Newseum, the Newseum. I don't know if you heard of that, but it was a museum devoted to the news industry, the press. It was in Washington, D.C. It's now defunct. I don't know what has happened to their collections, but I have one cartoon in there that I'm proud of. That's where it belongs because it was my cartoon that the people will say he was ahead of his time when he drew that cartoon. But I wasn't ahead of my time. I was right in my time. I was just seeing it. Nobody else was paying attention. I wasn't ahead of my time. Everyone else was behind. It was a cartoon that showed the front page of a newspaper, and it was called The Last Newspaper. And it was about what the front page of the last newspaper would look like. And right in the middle of it said, "Today's cartoon is banned." And then it had little things like, "This is my editorial on the weather because everybody talks about it and nobody can do anything about it." It had constitutional amendments we support and included abolishing free speech, things like that. That was the last newspaper, and that's what the museum got.
Yeah.
Um, but
Well,
yeah, physical stuff is that you see some physical, and the rest of my digital stuff will go to the Billy Ireland Museum. Um, but my historical writing, uh, my friends and I we're trying to set up our own place to archive that because there's really no place yet to put stuff like that. Our research into deep politics, um, the bad stuff, the unspeakable. There's no place to put that writing, and there's a huge amount there. And there are a few people who have passed away. John Judge, Joe Green talked about him. Mae Brussel, who you knew, right? You knew Mae Brussel.
I didn't ever meet Mae Brussel, but I went to her archive once, and I hope it's stored somewhere
Yeah.
safely. It was up, I think, in the Bay Area, but yeah, all that stuff is really important to be saved.
And
You
what
know,
therein lies the problem we are still dealing with today. And she died in 1988, I think, 88 or 89. We're still dealing with it. There's nowhere to put that stuff, and we worry about May's stuff. We worry about John Judge's stuff. There's a collection of some of the great Penn Jones and Jack White and a few others. A guy named Cutler. Uh, of all places, Baylor University in Waco, Texas, there was one archivist who built a collection of those great first generation researchers of the Kennedy assassination. But it sits in limbo now at Baylor. And that's the problem. Because if you don't have a devoted curator, a devoted archivist who will take care of that stuff, it will be forgotten. It will be stored away and forgotten if it's kept at all. So it's a big problem. So there's
So
my spiel on
no,
archives. My
Richard, so important what you just said. But bottom line, is archiving more innate or more invented by humans?
I think it's invented because it was the great chief from in the Seattle tribe. I forget his name, who said, "Take only memories and leave only footprints."
Oh my God. Take only memories. What's the last part?
And leave only footprints.
Amazing.
Chief Seattle was
Chief
his name.
Seattle. Beautiful. So,
So it's
us-
invented, but it's important. And, you know, as long as our intellect has a use for archives, uh, they're important and they're necessary.
yes.
But the Native Americans didn't have a need for that. They had their stories, they had their oral tradition, as much of civilization did before the scientific revolution, the Renaissance. Oral traditions, the troubadours, um, and they passed knowledge down stories. Before writing, there were the stories that were told, spoken. That was the archives. But as writing has developed and and the science and intellectualism has developed, and we've parsed everything more detail, archives became necessary. The great Library of Alexandria, such a tragedy when that burned. Already, it was it was seen as a valuable thing to collect that stuff. And what I just said about the first triumvirate of Rome, uh, that has great value in easing our sense of what's happening to us today. Maybe not so much easing it as to at least being prepared for what's coming. But if somebody hadn't saved all that history of Rome, I would have never known about it. We would have
Yeah.
never known about it. And its relevance keeps coming back. So it's important. The more we, the more we think about it, the more we think we have to think about it, the more valuable it is. But we would be fine if we were like the Native Americans. I think, we would still be fine. And that gets to what I was going to say about people who live in the now. Artists live in the now. You said that in the now lies peace. You're
Yeah.
looking for peace. Peace is in the now. And that's part of the art of going to sleep. The art of going from wake to sleep is really getting in touch with now. Not only yourself, but now, yourself and now. Because there is where peace is. Peace is not in the future, certainly. Peace is not in the past. You think about the future and the past, you have no peace. You only have peace in the now.
So beautiful because it reminds me I do these exercises before I ever speak to the public. I go, let's take one deep breath in consciously because we do it all day unconsciously. So consciously together, live in the moment, take it in and be present. And I love that in now peace lives. Beautiful. Because it's kind of you've progressed, you've had this career of being, art interest, ad man, cartoonist, political researcher, and now you're doing these essays like the one you just talked about. Faulkner said sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. I mean, your essay is basically what, more journalistic in opinion now? What is your essay called now? Political research, or how would you categorize it?
Well, I have a little blurb introducing it there on the site, but it's basically I my specific focus. Uh, it is politics. It is deep politics, but my specific focus is And Joe Green came up with this definition of what I do. I wasn't really even aware of it, or I hadn't defined it this way, but Joe Green said that I take the threads from 63 that that come up into the present. I follow the threads of the politics of 1963 and the horror of all that, and I bring those threads up into the present. And I'm about the the reality, and not only that, but how the assassination of Kennedy is the driving force of today's politics. You will
Yeah.
not be able to understand today's politics without understanding the entire history of the Kennedy assassination, because it has driven our politics ever since, and it has certainly driven our elections. It has been the primary unspeakable aspect of our elections since 2016. And I started writing. You remember um, Theodore White, um, the Making of the President series
Yeah.
that he did. The
Yep.
Making of the President. I read all of Theodore White's The Making of the President, and it really gave me my first real understanding of what was happening with presidential elections. Um, and so that his inspiration is coming to me in terms of the deep politics of today's elections, and I started writing detailed and my insightful essays about these elections in 2016 because I stumbled on this realization just by accident. I stumbled on a fact that nobody knew about, nobody was talking about, and I not even me, because I saved that fact for a good 10 years before it became super relevant when Hillary was running for president. And that's when that little factoid was turned into an essay. And that essay defined that election so well, the 2016 election, that I saw the thread in the latter election. So I have the 2016 essay, which is the last essay in my book. But in my Substack, where I continued the sequels to that, I have two about 2020 election, and I just did two on the 2024 election. So, but that's that same thread, that little tiny little fact that nobody knew or cared about Hillary in 2016, that led to now 5 essays that I think absolutely is explaining what's going on now. And it's not anything you'll hear in the media. Um, but no one's come after me. And I was going to say to your question that when I was doing political cartoonists are really, and other cartoonists will tell you this, and this became a known thing if you study editorial cartooning and political cartoon. Uh, a political cartoon is a signed editorial.
Yeah.
Uh, and someone recently, I thought this was brilliant. Someone recently, just in the last day or two, I came across this. Um, there's a distinction to be made between an editorial cartoon and a political cartoon. An editorial cartoon uh, is the editorial slant of the organization, of the news organization, the newspaper. It used to be. So you do an editorial cartoon, you're basically doing the slant of that paper's editorial page editor. A political cartoon, though, you can say is the political statement of the cartoonist himself,
Of the
and
cartoon. Yes.
of the cartoonist. So there's the editorial position of the paper, and there is the position of the cartoonist, which they will, especially today, they will write disclaimers saying, we don't agree with the opinions of our
Yeah.
cartoonists or others. But yeah, I love that distinction that the editorial cartoon is the position of the paper, the political cartoon is the position of the cartoonist. Um, so I was doing um, editorial journalism. All editorial cartoonists, political cartoonists, are doing editorial opinion journalism. That's what that is. That's
Yeah.
opinion journalism. Um, that has been weaponized. If you want to say anything's been weaponized, opinion journalism has certainly been weaponized, and I think that's what Fox News is. Um, but opinion journalism used to be the road to sanity rather than the road to insanity.
Used to.
And used to be the road to sanity. If you, I mean, in some of the better school districts, you will find them studying in their history studies. They study political cartoons, and I know this because a lot of my cartoons were bought and put into high school history books
Wow.
and put into high school history curriculums, and that's when I became aware that this is happening, and it even goes up through the university level. Because if you want to know the truth about any part of history, go look at the political cartoons. And most of them, you, not all of them, but most of them, you will have to study the issue because it'll be completely foreign to you what the cartoonist was saying. But it still is a simplification of it, and it's a road into that issue. There are also what we call evergreen cartoons where you can see them in any period of history and they will communicate you right away because they don't get into the specific local politics and politician. They're more about a cultural issue or a bigger picture of the political situation. Those cartoons exist and you will understand them immediately on sight. Won't have to study the issue at all. And a lot of those cartoons, people look at them today. Let's talk about archivists. I was just reading an archivist at Columbia University. She was saying, it always amazes me. I study older cartoons, the history of cartoons every day. I see them, and it's amazing to me how relevant they are to what's happening today. And I'm talking about today.
Yeah.
Um, so that's something the cartoon archivists experience. Certainly, they know that at the Billy Ireland Museum.
That's a
Uh,
good survey there, Richard, because that's like all times are happening now that all at onceness exists. But it's also touching on that Wyndham Lewis quote: "Artists live in the present and write a detailed history of the future." That's what you're sort of doing. You're doing a detailed history of the future in a way with your current essays and your book. So, screenwriting teacher told me great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. What role does intention play in your creative process when you're writing these essays and your book?
oh well, everything. In my process and what I create, it's everything. Um, More so than a lot of my cohorts who are writing about the same subjects. I have an intent, and I've written entire essays about that intent to stop the lies. Um, Harold Rothman, who wrote a book called How the Warren Commission Framed Lee Harvey Oswald. I made a meme on this too. It's this quote: uh, I, I can't think of a greater threat than a government that lies about the murder of its leader.
Huge.
And so,
Yeah.
and so my intent is to stop the lies. And I have a plan. I have a name for the plan. And I wrote an essay with this as the title, Operation Zugzwang. That's my
And
plan. And
what is
my
that word?
intent, Zugzwang is a wonderful German word from the profession of chess, the game of chess. And what it is when you have put your opponent in such a position that no matter what move he makes, he ends up in a worse position. That's called getting your opponent in Zugzwang. And so my intent is to put Operation Zugzwang into action and to achieve that goal um, with our political opponents.
Well, that's good because I was going to ask what's the difference between revolution and rebellion? And I kind of say, well, rebellion, there's something wrong. Let's do something. Revolution is re evolving, saying there's something wrong and here's a new plan. I mean, how do you suss out the difference between rebellion and revolution?
Lennon and McCartney said it, and Revolution, in the song Revolution. Um, you tell me it's the institution. Well, you better change your mind instead.
Yeah.
Because and I read an interview where Lennon expanded on that. John Lennon said, um, because changing your mind is the only true revolution.
Wow.
And
What's
I
the
see that.
Go ahead, sorry.
I was anticipating that question. I see that in my cohorts writing the same things I write because I read them more than anything else these days. And I see that they're stuck. There's, and I've written about this too. They're in a bubble, and they're repeating themselves. They're trying to they're trying to solve the Kennedy assassination, which was really you could say it was completely solved by 1970, completely solved. Um, because just today, a press conference out of New York, a spokesperson for the NYPD was saying, or was it the FBI, whatever, was saying that uh, I'm forgetting his exact words, but the investigation is done. Our investigation is done because they've named their person of interest in that assassination of the CEO. Um, and you wonder, well, there's a lot of questions, a lot of things they've got to interrogate the guy. They've got to gather evidence still. But what he's saying is very important in criminology. In criminology, you have to bring your investigation to a stopping point for it to go further. You know, you don't investigate something for 60 years. At some point, the investigation is done and it goes to judicial level. It goes into the courts. Um, you bring charges. You bring indictments. You take a thing to trial. Um, that's and and that's what Jim Garrison did. And that's why I put the end of the investigation. I put it back to Garrison's investigation. Garrison essentially figured it all out, and then took it to trial, where it belonged. Now the trial had some problems, but we've had verdicts. Uh, he was not able to convict Clay Shaw. We've since learned that had evidence that was not in the trial had it been allowed in, it was actually correct, and it would have convicted Clay Shaw in that. But we also have the verdict in the Martin Luther King trial, and there's several of us who are very focused on that now, getting the public to know about that. December 9th, 1999, the verdict came back in the trial, in the conspiracy trial of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And the verdict was it was a conspiracy that included elements of the Memphis Police Department and elements of the federal government, including Army Special Forces. Now, say what you want to about all that, and people have and still do. But the verdict stands, and that's the value of getting it into court. The verdict stands. Opinions about a conviction are, and I made this point at the very beginning of my first triumvirate essay. because I'm talking about the 34 counts against Donald Trump. That's in my first paragraph. I said, um, that conviction of Donald Trump was the reality of it is that he was guilty before he became president. So he was guilty of those crimes when he took the oath of office, which nullifies the oath of office
Yeah.
and negates his entire presidency. Now, in a just world that lived by the rule of law, which tells you the rule of law has always been a myth, in a just world where you live by the rule of law, where it is the priority, Trump, his entire presidency would be illegitimate. Everything would be taken off the books. Everything would be erased. Um, and he certainly wouldn't have become president again because it would have been the greatest travesty of American history. There are bigger travesties, let me tell you, but it would have been considered one of the great travesties of American history to have to nullify an entire administration, which, by the rule of law, that's where we stand. And I made the point at the end of that paragraph that, here we are, stranger in a strange land, where the rule of law has now been fully exposed as a myth, as just a story we told ourselves that's not true. That says a lot about where we are.
Says
Um,
a lot. Richard, that was really deep. You taught me a lot there, and I appreciate that. And so what's the difference between rights and responsibilities?
well, okay, well, I believe that rights. I love what the Constitution says. Inalienable rights. Rights are inalienable. Rights are not granted. They are inalienable. They already exist. Human rights exist. They do not have to be given. They do not have to be granted. They can't be taken away. Um, that's a right. A responsibility is to perhaps list those rights. A lot of the founding fathers didn't want the Bill of Rights. They thought the Bill of Rights was a bad idea because by the mere act of listing rights gave the strong impression that those rights were being granted, which they were not. And that was a valid argument. Nonetheless, we have the Bill of Rights. And people to this day still make that mistake. They will say, "Oh no, they're taking our rights away. Uh, they're going to have an amendment that's going to take away, or they Roe v. Wade. We went through that with Roe v. Wade. Oh no, they took away our rights, the right to choose. They didn't take away. You can't take away rights, but people think that they think that the rights were granted and that they can be taken away. Neither is true, and it's because of that that very wrong idea that's very pervasive in people's minds that the Bill of Rights was a granting of rights. No, it was not. It was just a listing to reinforce those rights. And they felt the responsibility to do that. And the reason it's still there is because we still feel the responsibility to do that. But it's that double-edged sword of it's thought of in very wrong terms that it's the granting of rights. But anyway, so that's my spiel on the difference between rights and responsibility.
That was really deep. So, Richard, I asked for 90 minutes and it's almost there. I think we should plan a part 3 down the line, but can you go a little longer now?
Oh, sure, yeah. We seem to be doing okay,
Let,
technically.
let's let's do a couple more because this is really good. Utah Phillips, labor activist and folk singer, said anarchy is making rules for yourself and not other people. And I'm curious your thoughts. Who's entitled to make the rules?
Well, that's a real problem. Um, and Orwell, once again, Orwell wrote very insightfully about that in the book Animal Farm. The revolution will arise, the insurgency will arise. Oh my God, we just had it happen in Syria, and it happens. The government changes, the new people take over, and it all starts over again. That was the point of Animal Farm, the great George Orwell. And once again, Orwell was not predicting the future. He was writing about what he was seeing happening at his own time.
Yeah.
Um, and some of us are more equal than others. That was the catchphrase from Animal Farm. Um, so, um, yeah, so it's a tough one.
It
Um,
is because, most people I say, who's entitled to make the rules? Well, the wording's a little tough because that word entitle carries a lot of baggage. So it's like, I can't say who should make the rules. I mean, a lot of people go, who's entitled to make the rules? Well, the people, we are the democracy of all the people voting or choosing, or, you know, some people go, no, the specialists should make the rules. They know more. So it is a troubled kind of challenge, like who makes the rules, because in actuality an anarchist specialist told me what Utah Phillips says is wrong. That's not what anarchy is. But if you look up the word freedom, etymologically it breaks down to that very same thought. Freedom comes from giving oneself one's own laws. So my question is, what does freedom mean to you now? But I'm going to set it up with two. T.S. Eliot said, freedom is only truly freedom when it appears against the background of an artificial limitation, which caused McLuhan to say, how are you to argue with people who insist on sticking their heads in the invisible teeth of technology, calling the whole thing freedom? So again, there's a lot of prompts, but the basic question is, Richard, what does freedom mean to you now?
well, as you were saying all that, I kept going back to this quote. I used it at the top of one of my essays. I can never remember the person who said it.
Yeah.
She's a Russian lady. She said it in a novel that she wrote. I give all the correct credits on it. But here's the quote: "The rules are simple. They lie to us. We know they're lying. They know we know they're lying, but they keep lying to us, and we keep pretending to believe them." So our, you know, our freedom, our lack of freedom, is very largely our fault for
Yeah.
playing the game. For following that rule. That was a humorous quote, but it's brilliant. It's a brilliant humorous quote. The rules are simple. They lie to us. We know they're lying. They know we know they're lying, but they keep lying, and we keep pretending to believe them. So freedom is best. All we have to do is stop pretending. Um, and anyway, I feel, freedom is our own personal responsibility. We have to, as you can train a horse. So always, when I think about freedom, I think of this. You can train a horse to stay put by just wrapping the the lead around the uh, because eventually they stop resisting. You'll tie them up for a while, but then you don't have to tie them up anymore. You just wrap it around the post, the hitching post, and they will stay put because they no longer question whether or not they can move. They just accept that they can't move. And training a lot of our domesticated animals are the same way. So that's the way we train dogs.
Yeah.
Um, and we're pretty much the same way. I mean, it's not as easy to train us, but we're trained. We're very domesticated, very trained. Um, and it's, you know, we think rules exist that don't. And it's the same thing with our pets that we train and our domesticated animals that we train. So we have we have the ability to be free. Um, but do we have you have to make that mental jump. That's why Lennon and McCartney said it right. Um, well, you'd better change your mind instead. It's not the institution. It's in your mind.
Yeah. It's amazing. That's Zappa's question. Who are the brain police? He didn't say they're the evil corporate capitalists or they're the voice inside your head. He just asked the question. He posed the question to kind of nurture critical thinking. But this quote about they lied to us is amazing, and it kind of reminds me of a Texan artist. Bob Dobbs, his name is Doug Smith or Ivan Stang. He created the Church of the Subgenius, and
Right.
one of their sayings was "Pull the wool over your own eyes." So, I mean, is that resonate? That quote resonate with the "They lie to us" quote at all, or is it different?
Yeah, we're gaslighted for sure. We are gaslighted, but gaslighting only works if you become a partner in that gaslighting and you gas. That's the only. In fact, the only way gaslighting can work is if you accept the gaslighting and you start believing the gaslighting. So you are really gaslighting yourself. Those of us who have become very good at resisting the gaslighting know that better than those who don't,
Who don't?
because
Amazing.
we resist it every day. Every day we hear the lie, and the lie is a literal slap in the face. I will every time I watch the, and I've had to build mental barriers against this in order to keep watching the news. The way Joe Green put it was that we listen to the news and we hear gibberish. That's that
Yeah.
mental barrier. You have to define it as gibberish because every now and then the lie will creep through and you'll hear it. You try to just listen to it as background gibberish, but the lie will creep through and it literally hits you like a slap in the face. We are slapped in the face every day by our authorities,
Yeah.
our authoritarian authorities, our anchormen and women. Oh my God. The way on Meet the Press, when they interviewed Trump, uh, the first thing I said to my wife as we're listening to this, I said, "Oh my God, they're normalizing this guy. Every,
Totally.
no, he's things. He's even saying that election denial and all this, and she's letting it slide. She's not challenging him on obvious lies that he's saying, and that's normalization. And one of my essays about the 2020 election, I talk about Ron Rosenbaum, the authoritarian, the scholar. He's a scholar on Hitler, and this isn't just a novice, a layperson, an amateur bringing up the name Hitler. There are times when it is appropriate to bring up the name of Hitler, and if you are a scholar of Hitler, you are the one who should bring it up, and he does. And he used the example of the the normalization of Hitler in the early days, and he used the example of the Munich press. There was a newspaper in Munich, and he talks about how it was just incremental. It was just normal, incremental normalization, where they shut down the free press in Germany, shut down their opposing voices, and it's a case for normalization. And he was directly comparing that to what was happening with Trump, and he was doing that back during 2017. And I wrote about it for my first 2020 essay, 2020 election essay. I quoted him in that extensively, and he nailed it. I think you know I might be biased about my own essays, which are my opinions, but I think I back them up. I learned in editorial cartooning that I'm not going to publish something until I can completely defend it. Um, and so I will research something to the hilt, and I will make sure, Davy Crockett said, make sure you're right, then go ahead. And that's been my one rule in my cartooning and in my political writing. And that's why I've had almost no, in fact, I can say it, I can go all the way and say, I have had no serious criticism of my deep political writing. And I think by sticking to that rule, that's the reason that I can completely defend everything that I've said publicly in writing. Not always verbally, because I've been doing a lot of podcasts the last couple of years, and I cringe when I listen to myself back. I'll misspeak a lot. Not so much in this style of an interview. I love this because it's all over the place and it's fun and it's playful. It's playful. But when I'm
Good.
doing
Yeah.
a serious interview
Yeah.
about a serious topic, and I misspeak and I say something wrong, I cringe about it forever. I'm not a perfectionist by nature, but becoming an artist forced me to be a perfectionist in art,
Yeah.
because I learned early on that one thing you let slide, doing graphic design, doing a poster, whatever it was, uh, doing a logo, that, it's the end of the day, you're tired, you're on deadline, I'm going to let that slide. It haunts you. It haunts
Yeah.
for the rest of your life, because you go to the archive, you see that you haven't seen it in 20 years. First thing that hits you is that error that you didn't have to let it slide, but you were too tired and you did, and there it is, and it screams at you for the rest of your life. It haunts you.
Yeah.
So I very quickly was forced to become a perfectionist in my art, and that translated over into my cartooning and in my writing and in the opinions that I make public, that I publish. I make sure I can defend them. That doesn't mean I'm not wrong, but I'm saying, come at me, bro, because I'm ready for you.
Richard, it reminds me of, it's human to fail, and that showing your humanity is important. Frank Zappa said, I'm a failure, but I'm not a miserable failure. And you're very concise and You're very concise and articulate, and I appreciate it. And I love you brought in the word play, but it is also this word McLuhan used, needling the somnambulism, like waking people up. Like Joyce's title is "All You Finnegans Wake Up." So, a couple little things before we close out. I'm just curious. Back to that line by Alan Watts. If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. So, I mean, it's important to realize this horrible humanizing of criminals. So, how do you, kind of process that? The Watts thing. Most people, I ask them, "What do you think of Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them." I go along with that, and some people go, "If you don't acknowledge them, you empower them." So, any thoughts on that?
Yes, that's another major rule that I tried to learn. I I learned it somewhat, but it's I credit it to another great cartoonist. Name I'm blanking on his name, um, but he was a caricaturist, and I started out in cartooning as a caricaturist, portrait caricaturist, like
Yeah.
Levine, Jerry Gersten, and there are great illustrative caricaturists, and they lampoon all the celebrities, all the politicians. And this one said that he was going to stop caricaturing certain people because of that, because it does empower them. By turning them into a cartoon caricature and publishing that and getting a lot of people to see it, um, it empowers them. And writing, yes, uh, by naming them, the more you name them, the more power it gives them. The more you rant against them, the more it empowers them. So I only mention their names when absolutely necessary. Uh, and and that's the reason I will not dwell on the
Yeah.
person.
That's good.
I will
Rich.
I will dwell on the criticism of the person, and I will expand the arguments about that. But I will not dwell on just rants against the person because it
Yeah.
does empower them to name them.
It's really good. It reminds me, Jean-Luc Godard went up to Michael Moore when Fahrenheit 9/11 played at the Cannes Film Festival years ago. And he said, "Dude, this film's going to help Bush get elected." Now, it didn't help Bush get elected per se, but it did galvanize pro-Bushers. So, that's how there's a balancing act. And how much are you going to reveal this? Say
Yeah,
names. Go ahead. Yeah.
that's the the Democratic Party strategy in the 2024 election is about that very thing. In fact, I started seeing it late in the election campaign that they were empowering Trump. They were getting Trump elected because their whole focus was hate this guy. Look how bad he is. And every ad they did for Trump was an ad for Trump. It's the Democrats that got Trump elected.
Yeah.
And that happens in politics all the time. The more you
All the
rant against your opponent, the more power you're giving them and the more victories you're giving them.
Yeah. So let's close out, Richard. This has been amazing, and I really appreciate your time and energy, and you really teach me a lot. This word bias, this phrase bias of authenticity came up in part one. And Louis Buñuel, the great filmmaker, said, "I'm for anyone who seeks the truth, but I part ways when they claim they found it." So I'm curious how you process the bias of authenticity. What is that? And this Buñuel saying, "I'm for anyone who seeks the truth, but I part ways when they claim they found it."
Yeah. Well, I think open being wrong. It speaks to being a listener. Um, and you know, you have to listen to to criticism of your own ideas. And you don't always have to engage the opponent, but it goes back to that conversation, creative conversation you have. You your opponent is that canvas. Your opponent is trying to drawing on. You have to listen back. The biggest mistake novice artists make. We talked about the difficulty in drawing hands. You have to master drawing hands if you want to be a good draftsman and be considered a serious artist. You also have to master, having that dialogue with your medium and knowing when you are finished. The biggest mistake, the difference between a good artist and a bad artist is not knowing when the piece is finished.
Yeah.
Now, it can be, I just saw a guy on how to paint TV show, not Bob Ross, but another guy. And he had started a painting. And he said, now I want to point out here that all paintings start out as impressionism. And he made the wise statement that you could stop here and have an impressionistic painting. Or you could keep going and have a more detailed painting. But you better know what you're doing because and I also think that halfway into any painting, it's a disaster. And the second half of the painting is bringing it out of that disaster to the masterpiece.
Yeah.
And that's true of every creative thing you do. I think I've talked to a lot of artists about this, musicians, whoever's doing creative stuff. Halfway into it, it's a complete disaster. And the people who never become artists are the ones who throw it away at that point. And they don't struggle. That second half is the struggle. And when I go to a new work of art, the thing I'm looking for, talk about taste. The thing when I go to support a painting or to buy a painting or to, give my level of taste to that painting, I'm looking for that struggle. I'm looking for how much did the artist struggle. And you get to where you can see it pretty clearly. You can see it almost right away. That they didn't spend sure you got to stop, but you also got to know when to continue. But knowing when you're finished.
That is heavy, Richard. I'm gonna hopefully set up a part 3 somewhere down the line and start with my struggle question, because that is so important, what you just talked about, struggle and risk. But what you just said reminded me, the first film I ever curated to screen in the mid-70s in Ann Arbor, Michigan was Hearts and Minds by Peter Davis. It's one of the great anti-Vietnam documentaries. And he said something similar. He said, the hardest thing for a documentary filmmaker is when to know to turn the camera off because you're filming and it's like, okay, I think I got that. And now video has enabled people, your drive might end up full of visual information, but your audio can keep going. So at least you get the audio, because you go, okay, thanks for the interview. You shut it off. And then the guy says the most amazing thing, to continue the flow. It reminds me of Sonny Rollins would not stop playing his saxophone. He'd go backstage after the show ended and keep playing. And his musicians would go, dude, we're done. And he said, I'm still trying to work things out.
Yeah.
So knowing when to finish is a big challenge. And it really is an important point you just made there, Richard.
Certainly in improvisational jazz. I didn't mention filmmakers, but true, all creative acts, and certainly improvisational jazz. Man, talk about knowing when to finish, or even improvisational comedy. Once
Yes.
again,
Oh, yeah.
amazing. You got to know when you hit that punchline.
Yeah.
We got that. Yeah, knowing when to finish. Good stopping point, huh?
Yeah, we're not finished. I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, but this will never end. I swear, Richard, we got to keep this dialogue going. My favorite is the revolution is two people talking. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to hit this end stream button, but again, I hope this never ends. Thank you, Richard.